said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age."
We are talking about Designed for Discipleship. This is a series I've been working on for a big chunk of the year. I'm really excited that we're finally to this point that we get to share everything we've been talking about and experiencing as a team, as a staff. But we're going to be talking about what it looks like for spiritual formation here at Real Life Church Pullman and just in general. And to start off, I want to tell you a story. So in my office, there is a ring that you can see. It's on the top of my bookshelf. Some of you have been in my office, have seen it. It is a state championship ring that I won in 2005, part of a football team. And I like it for a few reasons. One of the reasons was we were the only team in school history to ever do it. Flex, right? So that's always kind of neat when you can be the only team, first team to do that. But the second reason I really like it, and it means a lot to me, is engraved in that ring is the phrase, "Follow me." Follow me is engraved in that ring. You know, that year we had a fullback named Kirby Smith. Fullback is a position in football that kind of leads the running back through the hole in the line so they can gain more yardage. And kind of an underwhelmed, underloved position in our day and age of football. But back then, fullback was an important part of our offense, and his name was Kirby Smith. And during some of the spring training and fall sports, he kind of jokingly taped to the back of his helmet, "Follow me." So as a kind of a joke to the running back to say, hey, don't lose track of me in this, blob of humanity as we go through the line. So we all thought that was really funny. And then just knowing Kirby, it made more sense. And the start of the season, though, Kirby was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia about 1 or 2 games into the season, losing a vital part of our team. So "follow me" kind of began to take a different type of meaning. We're going from a witty joke into really an anthem cry for our team in a year where we were supposed to and predicted to win state with the talent that we had on the team. And one of the most powerful moments of winning that state championship game, really, though, was when we had the crowd after the game, after we had won. Thousands of people. You can imagine a small town. Everyone came to the game. Everyone chanting "Follow me" in unison. It was a really powerful moment as Kirby sat on the sideline, weakened by his cancer. Kirby would actually go on and beat leukemia and is doing great as a husband, as a father. It's a real miracle, big grace from God for that to happen. But none of us will ever forget those words, "Follow me." And that ring is always an example and a testament to what it looks like to follow me. A reminder every day of that story. "Follow me" was our rallying cry that year. And I don't know if we would have had the motivation to go to do what we did without that rallying cry, because it changed us. It motivated us to practice harder, to focus more, to bring greater team cohesion. In many ways, it changed us. It changed that entire year. I mean, at one point, we had lost 2 straight games, and we were kind of like, oh, here we go again. Moab isn't going to be very good at football. We've never been great at football. And so it looked like, here we are, this overhyped team. And then when things happened with Kirby, it brought things into a deeper level. It changed the way we focused, practiced, prioritized our lives. It motivated us. I can even remember my mother being like, hey, this was back when they did junior class rings. Do they still do junior class rings? I don't even know. But I was a junior during that time. Mom's like, do you want a junior class ring? And I says, no. I'm getting a state championship ring. I knew it. Right? It was this important thing for us, and this "follow me" idea was a big part of it. We weren't just playing for us anymore. We had bigger things that we were trying to pursue. And what I learned through that experience, and what I continue to learn now almost 20 years later, is that who or what we choose to follow changes us. It molds us, it challenges us, it motivates us. In effect, we become who or what we follow, for both the good and the bad. Who are you following? What is your following anthem cry today? The Bible calls this process of following discipleship. Discipleship. And discipleship to Jesus begins with that simple yet powerful invitation to follow him. This begins everything. Following Jesus. Jesus' invite to his disciples, and by extension to us today, wasn't recorded as some great persuasive discourse or argument. He didn't get up and say, here are the 10 reasons why you should follow me. He didn't get up and say all these important things that would bring some of these early disciples to him. It was a simple invite. You look at the story of Peter and Andrew, some of his closest friends. It says in Matthew 4 that he saw two brothers. They were Simon and his other name was Peter, and Andrew, his brother. They were putting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Jesus said to them, "Follow me. I will make you fish for men." Kind of a first century phrase for a great rabbi is a fisher of men, someone who captures the imagination and thoughts of his audience. So he says, "Follow me. I will make you fisher of men." And once they left their nets and followed him. James and John, similar in Mark 1, he says, when he had gone a little further, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. To all of his disciples, he will say in Matthew 16, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and" what? "Follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" You know, if you're here or you're listening online or in your car later this week, whoever is listening to this, you have a desire to want to follow Jesus. I believe that. You're here, you did the work of getting here in order to do this. I believe that you have a desire to do that. But I think for many of us, we don't really understand what it means to follow Jesus or to be his disciple. I think these can be just religious words that are thrown out, discipleship, following Jesus, that have kind of become, in a way, convoluted and kind of confusing for some of us. I know it was for me for many years. So to answer that question, I want to start with this series just by giving a first century understanding of what it looked like to be a disciple and to follow a rabbi. So who's ready to kind of nerd out for a few minutes? All right. We are a nerdy group, and I love it. All right. So let's talk about first century rabbinic teaching for a moment. So Jesus had many titles. Among them, things like Messiah or Christ. You know, Christ was not his last name, in case you're wondering. We have Lord or Savior, but he was also known as Rabbi. It merely just means master or teacher. And the rabbis in the first century were the spiritual masters or teachers of Israel. These were people who would go from town to town, village to village, synagogue to synagogue, and they would share their yoke. A yoke to a rabbi is their understanding, their interpretations of Scripture. And how many of you know about Jesus' yoke was what? Light. His interpretation, his teachings were light, whereas others were burdening and heavy. Rabbis would go and share their yokes with Israel. They were experts of teachers and interpreters of the Old Testament, the law or the Torah and the prophets. The goal would be to draw or gather disciples. As a rabbi, your goal was to gather or draw a group of disciples that might be your apprentices. I think another great word for disciple is apprentice in our modern age. I think in one way I almost want to change that word out in all of our minds from disciple to apprentice, because it just captures that meaning so much better. Because disciples were carbon copies of their rabbis. You know, in an age of individualism, in an age where everyone kind of wants to be their own thing, this would be so foreign to a first century Jewish person. Because to have a rabbi was a main goal, and an apex of life was to be a disciple of a rabbi. That you would be the carbon copy of your master, your teacher. You would eat like them, you would live like them, you would teach like them, you would give the interpretations like he did. That was your focus point in life. Rabbis were there to teach, instruct, and develop their disciples or apprentices into spiritual reflections of themselves. You know, so you would have, there were a lot of different rabbis in Israel. Jesus didn't come up with this new system all on his own or anything. This was something that had been there for generations that he was then using as a tool, as a conduit for his own purposes. And a lot of times rabbis, they drew crowds and they had disciples. So just because you came and listened to a rabbi or even walked around a little bit with a rabbi didn't mean you were a disciple. They had massive crowds, but then they would also have closely related followers. So what did it look like then to become a disciple or apprentice? What did that mean in the first century? And how did Jesus follow that, but also completely subvert it? Well, to do that, let's talk about the Jewish educational system. I told you, super nerdy, right? Let's talk about the Jewish educational system in the first century. So the first thing you would do is, if you were a young Jewish boy or girl, is you would go to Bet Sefer. This is the house of the book. So this is boys and girls, 5 to 12, similar to our elementary schools today. The goal of that group would be to memorize the first 5 books of the Bible. So imagine that, your age is 5 to 12 and you're memorizing Genesis through Deuteronomy, right? Most of us have a hard time reading Genesis through Deuteronomy, let alone memorizing it and reciting it. This would have been the standard for any Jewish boy or girl to do that. At the age of 12, there would have been some that would go to the next group, but majority of them would not. The girls would stop. They would start focusing on getting married and taking care of the home. 13 or 14 was the average age of most of these girls who were getting married. The boys that didn't make it to the next group would go on to take on a trade like their father. Most of the disciples that we just read about would have been in this group. They took on the trade of fishing, most likely of their family skill. For those who showed promise, though, they would go to Bet Midrash, the house of learning. This was only boys. And they went up about to the age of 17. This is where most of our disciples probably were, about 15 or 17 when Jesus is calling them. Their goal would have been to memorize the entire Old Testament. So orally, they would have had the entire Old Testament memorized. How are you doing at memorizing Scripture, by the way? Yeah, I'm not doing very good. If I can get through the first 3 lines of Genesis, I feel pretty good about myself. Majority would have done. Majority would have been done at this phase, a great majority of them. And the common saying to the Jewish children out of this was, go make babies, pray that you become rabbis, and apply your trade. That was kind of their graduation ceremony out of that moment. Go make babies, pray that you become rabbis, and apply your trade. Now, only the best of the best, this is the summa cum laudes, the Ivy League equivalent type of people, would be invited to be a disciple under a rabbi. This is the word taladim. Taladim, it just means disciple. That's where we get the word from. And their entire focus would have been trying to find a rabbi, a master, a teacher that they would then assume the yoke of, and then they would travel with. Right? You'd find a rabbi, you'd be their apprentice. Similar to how we think about apprenticeship today. You find someone that you want to learn from, you immerse your life with them in order to become like them and to do what they do. A rabbi would interrogate you, challenge you of your knowledge of the Torah and the prophets. If he thought you had the smarts and the work ethic, he might let you join his little band of merry men. He'd say something along the lines of come follow me. It's a very formal thing of a rabbi to do. This is, again, the yearning of every 17-year-old Jewish boy getting out of this. He's, I memorized the Old Testament. The words I want to hear more than anything else in life is a rabbi who I look to, who I admire, for him to say, come and follow me. To be disciples of a rabbi, again, was the apex of the first century Jewish education system. I think the only comparison we have is a PhD program today. I remember as a history guy and wanting to study history years ago, this was kind of my track in education at the time. I wanted to go study under this professor at the University of Utah. He had the best books. He was the best mind on the Hellenistic period. Everybody was trying to get under this teacher so that you could learn from him and be like him, and then he would endorse you on to different programs. And I think that's similar to how the Jewish concept was of apprenticeship, is that you wanted to go under and take the yoke of these teachers, these masters, these rabbis. If you made it to a rabbi who accepted you as a disciple, your entire life was captured under your rabbi's yoke. His life and teachings were your focal point in life, and that's the important thing, your focal point. He was your world in a way. And a disciple had 3 main goals. Disciples came down into 3 main goals. One was to be with your rabbi. Second one was to become like your rabbi. And the third one was to do as your rabbi did. Every disciple in first century Judaism lived by these three things. How do you be with your rabbi? How do you become like your rabbi? And do as your rabbi did. A common first century blessing at the time of Jesus to many of these young disciples of rabbis was, may you be covered by the dust of your rabbi. May you be covered by the dust of your rabbi. You could imagine a young Jewish mother talking to her son who's just got into a discipleship under a rabbi, and her saying those words to that person. Be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Live so close to him, walk so closely to him that the dust from his sandals as he wanders from town to town covers you. To live your life in a way that was so close to your rabbi was the goal. John Mark Comer says this in his book, Practicing the Way. You would leave your family, your village, your trade, and follow your rabbi 24/7. You were a student, but class wasn't Wednesday, Friday from 11 a.m. to 11:50 a.m. Class was life. You would spend every waking moment with your rabbi, sleeping at his side, eating at his table, sitting at his feet, and end up after long hours walking behind him from town to town, covered in his dust. Covered in his dust. This is what it means to be a disciple. And this is what it still means to be a disciple. To be an apprentice is to live a life completely immersed with your rabbi. Now, here's the trick, and here's the thing I think we need to be thinking about with all this in mind. And a key indicator here that we need to wrestle with, I think, this week as we begin this Design for Discipleship series is you cannot follow Jesus, call yourself apprentice or disciple, and treat it as a hobby. There is no disciple that says, I'm an apprenticing on Mondays at 4 o'clock or Sundays at 11 a.m. Apprenticeship to Jesus is a full life given over to your rabbi. It is complete immersion and following of your rabbi. Because doing things as a hobby, if you were to treat following Jesus as a hobby, it just doesn't yield the type of life of someone who follows him. There isn't the fruits of yielding that are required to really represent Jesus well in our world. He must be our focal point to which we view everything and anything that we do and say. Now, my wife, I asked her if I could use this story as a good one. My wife, she's just subbing on Fridays and occasionally from things in the city and things. And one of the requirements was that she had to become CPR certified. And so she told me the other day, she's like, Kelly, I'm CPR certified. I'm like, great, what did you do? She's like, well, I took this 30-minute training online, and now I am CPR certified. And I kind of laughed, and I was like, do you honestly feel that if someone needs CPR, you could do it? And she's like, no, absolutely not. I'm like, crazy, that 30-minute online training didn't prepare you for CPR? And I think I just think that is exactly what we do when we don't apprentice and really understand what it means to disciple under Jesus, is that he becomes like a 30-minute training to us. I did this 30-minute message on Sunday, and it was great. And then what do you do the rest of the time during the week? We have so much knowledge of Jesus, but are we becoming like Jesus? Are we doing the things he did? Are we spending time with Jesus other than just maybe being, cognizant of Jesus? I think many of us have a knowledge of Jesus. We like his teachings. How could you not like his teachings? They're awesome. No matter if you follow him or not, you're thinking, boy, Jesus got a lot of good stuff to say. But is he our focal point? Are we immersed in it? Are we walking with him as if the dust from his sandals would be on our clothes? Has he yet moved into our position of rabbi? A lot of times we don't feel confident because we don't practice a life yoked to our rabbi. My wife would not feel confident at all going in and doing CPR on somebody because of a 30-minute training. So many of us don't feel confident in our walk with Jesus because we haven't really been discipled by him. We haven't really called ourselves a disciple. I think, John Mark Comer has a great line. He says, discipleship isn't a verb, it's a noun. It's either you are or you're not. You either are a follower or you're not a follower. We may know a lot about Jesus. We may even love the things he had to say, but are we being formed by him? And I think a lot of times the Christian frustration is that we sometimes sell people kind of this bait and switch. We're kind of like, yes, Jesus does all these great things, come and receive him. And then we get it, and then we're expecting some kind of satisfaction. And we're like, there's this life that Jesus talks about with abundance, that's great. And then we just never get to realize it because we thought all we had to do was just read our Bible and say a prayer once in a while. And I think we get frustrated with this when we realize that Jesus has so much more to offer us as our rabbi, as our master and our teacher. For some of us, we don't like to live a life covered in the dust of our rabbi because it requires us to change. It requires us to say no to things that we love and hold dear to our heart. And some of us, we just don't know how to. We've never really been taught what it looks like to disciple Jesus. If that's you in any of those, I'm really glad you're here because we're going to be talking about this for the next 7 weeks, is what it looks like to be a disciple, apprenticing under Jesus. Now, Jesus' discipleship was similar to first century, but it was also radically different in some ways. Jesus participated in the ordinary process of discipleship in the sense that he raised up disciples, but Jesus was no ordinary rabbi. He did things that subverted the first century idea of rabbinic and Jewish discipleship. He had the 12 apostles, of course, and a few of them were his closest friends. Peter, James, and John got to see some things that others disciples didn't get to see. But he had hundreds, if not thousands, of disciples across Galilee and Israel. Some of them did go through the highly educated system of the Jewish system. People like Nicodemus, eventually Paul. Paul was studied under a real famous rabbi in the first century. But most of them were not. Most of them came from that first group that made it through that first level of education. And they would have been shocked to have a rabbi say, "Come and follow me." I think if you don't understand that phrase and what it meant to these people, it's easy to gloss over that. But these guys were fishing on the net thinking, this is my life. This is exactly what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And their whole upbringing, they were taught, you go try to be a rabbi if you can, or even better, go be a disciple under a rabbi. And so that dream that kind of died in their heads, I think. They were kind of like, we weren't smart enough, we weren't good enough, we didn't have all the prowess of some of these other people. But yet they have Jesus and come along and say, hey, come follow me. And you can see why they just dropped their nets and ran, because they're like, this is it. This is the apex of existence right now for us. To be these 15, 16, 17-year-old kids going, absolutely, I got a rabbi. Absolutely, I'm a disciple of Jesus. It would have been exciting. It would have been a celebration for many of them. Some of them must have went home and been like, Mom, Dad, I have a rabbi. His name is Yeshua, and I get to follow him. And they would have been excited until they probably heard some of the things he had to say. Jesus subverted some of the Jewish educational system because he didn't look at the intellectual. He didn't look at the things that most of the Jewish system was looking at to call people to. He was looking at something different. He didn't care about those superficial things. He was calling everyone to follow him, regardless of class. Jesus was also the only rabbi we know of who had male and female disciples. Sisters, can I get an amen? Mary and Martha are great examples. Mary is commended for sitting at the feet of Jesus, a posture reserved for apprentices or disciples. Jesus taught with such authority that people were amazed and couldn't understand where he got his knowledge. They were like, what rabbi did you study under Jesus for you to be able to even have these interpretations? And this is where that language of Jesus and the Father being one, this connection that he has with God. He didn't study under any of the elite rabbis, those top-tier schools of his day. Now, I'm not against education. I'm a product of seminary, master's programs. I'll probably go get a doctorate one day as well, Lord willing. I'm not against those things. I'm just saying that God didn't qualify people using those things. And he had his own amazing authority to bring to bear. The authority that he uses there within the rabbinic context is the way he interpreted his teachings. He carried with him authority in that sense. This would be very similar to someone in our day and age, maybe a profound scholar, someone who's at the peak of their education, someone maybe at like a Princeton or a Harvard, or let's be honest, a WSU, right? At the very peak of it, right? And everyone knows who they are. They're famous for their insight and wisdom. It'd be like this person going out on X or Twitter and saying, hey, if anybody wants to come learn with me, come to our school, live in my home, I'll teach you, I'll mentor you, and I'll pay for everything. Just send me a message. I don't know too many people that would turn that down, right? He's like, even that, I'll give you a job afterwards. I'll help you, I'll hook you up into a place that you can belong and go after school. I think that person will get influx with probably, millions of messages saying, yes, I want to come learn from you. I want to come be with you. Teach me everything you want to know. It was a scandal for him to go around inviting fishermen to follow him, inviting just the plain old Joe and Jane to follow him. It was a scandal. It subverted some of the culture of his day. It would be unheard of today, and it was unheard of back then to do that. Jesus invited people to follow him, to be his apprentices without interrogation, but he made sure that they understood the expectation. That's the difference. He didn't interrogate, he didn't interview these people, but he understood, one of them understood the expectation. Following Jesus has no qualification other than the willing heart to receive and join their rabbi, and he expected them to be disciples. He said, you're going to be with me, you're going to become like me, and you're going to do what I did. And the goal of every disciple from this day moving forward, from that day to this day, is that we be with Jesus, we become like Jesus, and we do what Jesus did. This is what it means to be an apprentice and a disciple of Jesus. This is what we're going to be exploring for the next 6 weeks in this series, is how do we be with Jesus? What does that even mean? Jesus is at the right hand of God. How do I be with Jesus, right? How do we become like Jesus? We're all becoming somebody, whether you want to or not. Who do you want to become? If you were to create your character arc and throw it 10 years down the road, who are you? Who are you becoming? And then to do what Jesus did. When we read these things in the New Testament, all the things that he did, from being and becoming, what does that lead us into doing? And that's what we're going to be exploring, and some of the hard things that make that hard to do. In our modern day, the goal seems to create Christians more than it does apprentices of Jesus. Never fully understood that. But growing up in the church, it seemed we were more excited about people becoming Christians than we were ever focused on the idea of how to become apprentices of Jesus. How do we become followers of Jesus? We can focus way too much on things like conversion and completely dismiss the idea of transformation. And I think there's a lot of people who have had that experience that are really frustrated, that are feeling very discouraged because they want transformation, they want to know what it looks like to follow Jesus, but they just have never really been given that direction, or have maybe no one around them has known that direction. It's frustrating, I get it. Dallas Willard had this great quote. It's one of my favorite quotes in this series. He says, the greatest issue facing the world today, imagine that, the greatest issue facing the world today, all the political upheaval, the wars, the fighting, all of it. He says, with all of its heartbreaking needs, is whether those who are identified as Christians will become disciples, students, apprentices, practitioners of Jesus Christ, steadily learning from him how to live the life of the kingdom of the heavens and to every corner of human existence. See, all apprentices to Jesus are Christians, but all who call themselves Christians are apprentices to Jesus. And this is the level I want to take us. I want us to go from this idea of cultural Christianity. Maybe we said a prayer at one time, and I'm not against that. That's how I started. But to take us down into a deeper level of transformation, that where we can be cognizant of that we are being conformed to something, but we need to also be transformed by the renewing of our minds. I say this as a self-reflection. To be thinking about this week. Is your relationship with Jesus a focal point in your life? You can be a disciple of Jesus in the very context that you're in. You don't need to be vocational ministry. What does it look like to follow Jesus as a mother? What does it look like to be a disciple of Jesus as a student, as a teacher, as a farmer, in a combine? What does that look like? What does it look like to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did in your life? Following him in your context. Are you a Christian or an apprentice to Jesus? Are you a follower of Jesus? The term Christian is only used 3 times in the New Testament. 3 times. And it's often used by people outside of the church to label those. It was like a demeaning word a lot of times to us at the beginning. We redeemed it and made it something different. But the term disciple, apprentice, practitioner is used 269 times. No surprise, as it was written by disciples for disciples of Jesus. Discipleship is the way. This is the name of what we were called 2,000 years ago, was that we were the followers of the way. We're just getting back to those roots. If you look at our American context, and there was a survey done by the Worldview Inventory, it said 63% of Americans self-identify as Christians. 4% of Americans respond in a way that matches biblical discipleship. So you have a lot of people who call themselves Christians, and a very, very few who know what it means to follow Jesus. This idea of being a Christian, being any different than is no different than being an apprentice of Jesus. It's completely foreign to the Bible to say I'm a Christian but not a follower of Jesus. Be the follower of Jesus should be the focal point. Now the next question I want to kind of reflect on as we wrap up here is, am I a disciple, am I a follower, or am I a face in the crowd? Now where Jesus went and where he taught, there were crowds that followed him, but all the crowds were disciples. He drew crowds, he gathered crowds. They enjoyed Jesus, they enjoyed what he had to offer. They enjoyed the community he created. Yet when it came to following him, many just couldn't or wouldn't do it. And that is the difference between, a lot of times, our kind of modern idea of cultural Christianity and the follower of Jesus. And you know what? I get it. I understand that. I understand it's much easier to sit in the crowd. I understand it's so much easier to keep your head down in this world. I understand it. I don't hate it even. I'm like, there's a part of me that would be like, oh, that'd be nice to just be a face in the crowd. Because following Jesus is costly. It is uncomfortable. You're going to have to change the way you live your life. You're going to have to make decisions that are different than the way you've been raised, or the multi-generational things that you've learned you're going to have to confront and deal with. It's going to require saying no to things more than it will be saying yes to things. And I don't know about you, I hate saying no to things sometimes. It's difficult. It requires new perspective and training. If an apprentice is simply anyone whose ultimate aim is to be with Jesus in order to become like him and live the way Jesus would live, if he were in their shoes, then a non-apprentice, whether they identify as an atheist, a devotee of another religion, or even as a Christian, is simply anyone whose ultimate aim is life is anything else. What is your life aiming at? Again, who are you becoming? Are the choices that you're making, are the habits you've developed, are the things that you're putting into your life now, are they creating in you someone who is becoming like Jesus or becoming like somebody else? I'm not your rabbi. I'm here to point you to our rabbi who forms you and makes you into him. Spiritual formation isn't a religious or a Christian thing. It's a human thing. You're all being formed by something. We're all being formed by something. Every decision we make every single day is forming us into one thing or another. As one author put it, the crowds were fans of Jesus, not followers. The crowds were being formed by decisions that they made, decisions that they decided to follow through, whereas followers were also being changed and formed in one way or another. Which one do we want to be? We live in a time, really a pivotal time, I think, in the world, where this question is really important for us to address and self-reflect on, is who do we follow? Who are we following? Will we be a face in the crowd, or will we do the work of an apprentice? Now, as a response, I want to make sure I make something very clear, because I think you could walk out of this with a really misunderstanding of that I just want you to do more. Or maybe you're frustrated, you're going, hey man, I'm trying. What do you want me to do, right? I'm trying. I've been trying for years. I'm asking you to try. I'm asking you to train. It's different, isn't it? Now, I used to be a runner in college. I know it doesn't really show now, but it used to be. And I used to be able to run a very quickly 400-meter dash. 47 seconds was fairly good. I wasn't Olympic level, but it was respectable. And if I was to go out and just try to run a 400-meter dash right now, do you think I could do that? Absolutely not. I probably wouldn't make it 100 meters, right? I don't put things into place in order to succeed at that. Discipleship is all like this in following Jesus. We have this, we want to run a race. We want to follow Jesus, but many of us just don't put in the practices, the things that will help us change us, to transform us into images of Jesus. When I was a runner, I ate differently, I slept differently, I prioritized my life differently in perspectives. I had to in order to run well. And I think as Christians, we should think about this. As followers of Jesus, we need to think about this. What in our life do we put in that makes it successful for us to train well in following Jesus? I mean, how many of us, the first thing we do in the morning is you pick up your phone and start scrolling? Right? I'm not attacking you because I do this all the time. Right? It's little things like this. It's not about trying, it's training. We're going to talk about this over the next 6 weeks. It takes intentionality. It takes lifestyle changes and practicing the right things in order to slowly grow as followers of Jesus. And again, this race that we're in is not a fast race. Again, I'm not asking you to do a bunch of things and try a bunch of things. If anything, I'm asking you to eliminate things in your life, to do less. One of the greatest things I've learned this summer in doing a lot of these practices and kind of preparing for this is just eliminating hustle from my life and slowing down, saying no to things. I take Sabbaths and I take it seriously, not from a legalistic, check the box, but because I realize my soul needs to rest. That we serve the Lord of the Sabbath. How many of you love that we serve the God of naps? Amen, right? He's like, here's a day, just chill, man. I've learned the benefit of this. I'm not trying to tell you to go do, I'm actually saying eliminate things in your life. Discipleship is more about what you say no to than what you say yes to. And that's what we're going to be exploring as well. Don't walk out of here thinking you have more to do, because really I'm just trying to eliminate or even reorientate the order of things that you do. Like our state championship team rallying around Kirby's Follow Me slogan, Jesus' invitation to follow him is our anthem cry into creation, inviting us into a deeply satisfying and abundant life with him. This is the key here, is that first aspect of discipleship we're going to talk about next week, the idea of being with him. That is the ultimate reward of following him. It's not about running the race getting to the end and being like, wow, I'm finally spiritually mature, yay. I don't know if that ever happens. The reward is that you get Jesus. To be with him is the reward, and I have learned how satisfying and abundant that is in my least abundant moments. That is what following Jesus can do. Change the way we live our lives, motivating us, aligning us to our desires, practicing how he lives, and through the process of life, we begin to be conformed in his image. My prayer is that all of us live lives in a way where we carry the dust of our rabbis with us. That if we were to walk so closely with Jesus, that the dust from his sandals would be all over us. We are going to continue this in the next coming weeks as we study how we become followers of Jesus, as we be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. That's what Design for Discipleship is about.